Well, good morning. If you would open your Bible to the book of 1 Timothy, chapter 3. We've been going through this for several months now, and recently we have been going through a series called Imitating the Faith of Leaders, and we're on part 4 today, and we'll be concluding this series. I take that title from actually a different book in Hebrews 13, verse 7, which says, "Remember your leaders and consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith." And so as we've been looking at the qualifications of an overseer, we've been kind of filtering that through the lens of what is good for the shepherd is also good for the sheep. And these qualifications are not just for overseers. The majority of them are also good standards for us as a church to strive for. So as you would turn to 1 Timothy chapter 3, we'll read verse 1 through 7. I'll open us in a word of prayer, and then we'll jump into the last qualifications this morning. It's what Paul writes. "The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace and to a snare of the devil." Please pray with me. God, I ask that you would help us to see your glory this morning in the word, in the fellowship of the saints, in the singing, Lord. And all these things, God, would you help us to take our eyes off ourselves and to place them on the glory that you have had since the foundation of the world and that you still have to this moment. God, would you help us to fixate our eyes on something greater than ourselves, Lord, greater than this world, on a God who is eternal and a God who reveals himself to us. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Today we are concluding our 4-part series, Imitating the Faith of Leaders. And this morning, as I said, we're going to look at the last 3 qualifications that are given in this text of overseers. And as we've been doing over the past 4 weeks, we're going to keep the same pattern where I'll give you an exegesis of the qualification and then an application of the qualification. And that's where we're going this morning. So let's begin with the first qualification, the third to last, an exegesis of what Paul says. Overseer must manage his own household well with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. Now, there's a lot going on there, so we need to kind of break it down a little. All right, let's look at these phrases individually. The first word there, he says that he must manage. Well, what does that mean? It means to exercise a position of leadership, to rule, direct, or be at the head. Now, this word can also take the nuance of to have an interest in, to show concern for, to give care or give aid. It's used 8 times in the New Testament. I'll give you a couple examples of that. Romans 12, having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let us use them. The one who leads, that word lead there is the same word as manage here. So we see that this quality is also a spiritual gift. 1 Thessalonians 5, we ask you, brothers, to respect those who labor among you and are over you. That word over you is the same word as manage here. In the Lord and admonish you. And then 1 Timothy 5, later in this book, Paul says, let the elders who rule. That word rule is the same word as manage. Let the elders who rule be considered worthy of double honor. So an overseer must be able to manage, or we might say lead, lead his own household. How must he manage? Paul says he must manage well. That word well, it means pertaining to meeting relatively high standards of excellence or expectation, fitly, appropriately, in the right way, or splendidly. Now this word is used 37 times in the New Testament, and I'm going to show you all 30. No, I'm just kidding. So it's not that he just must manage, but he must manage well. All right? he must manage well, and he must also manage with dignity. That word dignity there means a manner or mode of behavior that indicates what is above ordinary and therefore worthy of special respect. Now, this word is used 3 times in the New Testament. One example is Titus 2:7, where Paul says, show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works, and in your teaching show integrity and dignity. So an overseer must be able to manage, he must manage well, and he must manage with dignity. Now, one of the ways of doing this, Paul says, is keeping his children submissive. Now, the word there for submissive is the noun form of the verb to submit. It's the same word that's used in all the submission passages in the New Testament of young submitting to the older and children submitting to their parents and wives submitting to their husbands. Same word, okay? I want you to notice, though, Paul does not say that the children must be submissive. He says that the overseer must be keeping them submissive. Now, how do you keep your children submissive? It's $1 million question. Well, you don't do it through beatings. You don't do it through neglect. You don't do it through abdication to the mother. You don't do it through yelling or giving threats. You do it through love and discipline and loving discipline. I'll talk about that more in just a minute. So the idea here is that an overseer must be able to manage, to lead, direct, and care for his household. Not only manage it, but manage it well. Having high standards in his house. Managing it with dignity. Manage it in such a way that is respectable. And this is a list of qualifications of overseers in the church. And so we might want to ask, well, if this deals with the church, what does family life have to do with the church? You know, right? Why is Paul giving a qualification of how an overseer should be at home? Isn't that a private matter? What's that got to do with the church? And Paul's reason that he gives here is that if someone does not know how to manage their own household, how will they care for God's church? Meaning if you have 2 or 3 or 4 little lambs running around and you can't shepherd those little lambs, how are you ever going to shepherd 40 or 400 full-grown sheep? That's his point. If you ever want to discover just how sanctified you are, spend 1 week trying to manage 4 little kids 24/7. You'll find out quickly how sanctified you are. So, application of manage your own household well. This is one of the qualifications that doesn't apply to all people. So what I want to do is I want to apply this qualification specifically to fathers. We now in this congregation have 6, count them, 6 biological fathers. We have many spiritual fathers and many potential spiritual and biological fathers. And I want to apply the principles behind this qualification to you men. Over the past several months, we've talked a lot about you women. And now, guys, it's your turn to hear some application. All right, for the father. So I'm going to give you 4 points of application. All right, here they are. Number 1, dads or future dads or spiritual dads, if you want to apply this in discipleship relationship, dads, you are the managers of your homes. This means that you desire responsibility. A husband, a father, a man desires responsibility. I was thinking about what to say in regards to what does it mean to be a manager or a leader or a director or a caregiver? What does that mean? There's so much to say here. I could preach the whole sermon. I could preach a whole series just on that one question. But I came across this blog written by a guy named Jason Halopoulos, and he entitled 10 Principles for Christian Fathers and Husbands. And I thought it was worth sharing. So I'm going to share the 10 principles and just give a short excerpt from them, okay? I was really blessed by this, and I want to share it with you. Here are 10 principles for Christian husbands and fathers. Number 1, I'll share it very fast. Number 1, pursue holiness. A Christian husband and father cannot lead where he has not tread. I remember hearing a quote similar to that. Someone challenged me one time saying, as a pastor, you can't take people where you haven't been. And I was really challenged by that. 2, know what you can control and what you can't control. May we know what we are empowered to do and what only the Lord can do. Guys, we are not Superman. 3, provide in every realm. By all means, bring home the bacon, but don't stop there. Practice consistent and regular family worship. Lead your family in reading the scriptures, praying and singing. Enjoy. Take your family to church each week. Engage your family in the ministry of the church. Pursue hospitality and inviting others to your home. Pray for your wife and your children. Don't think your job is done by putting a roof over their heads, clothes on their back, and food in their stomachs. They are body and soul. They need your provision in the spiritual realm as well. 4, practice humility. We lead by serving, and often that serving is sacrificial. 5, persist in joy and thanksgiving. A Christian husband and father establishes the culture of his home more than anyone else. The moody teenager, the fussy toddler, or even sullen wife are not the determining factor. You are. Men, you are. 6, be effusive in love. No wife or child has ever said, I was loved too much. 7, live in grace. Your wife and children should find you approachable, kind, gentle, and gracious. When they hear the word grace, it shouldn't be a foreign concept to their minds. They have known and received it from you consistently. 8, protect and be strong. You are to willingly and gladly stand up for your family, even if that costs you socially, professionally, emotionally, or even physically. 9, glory and weakness. When your wife and children reflect upon your strength, they always count it as from the Lord. You are happy for them to know the source of your strength. And 10, live with God's glory in view. We are always living in the shadow of God's glory. Demonstrate to them that every moment matters, every person is significant, every task is important. Now, that's a challenging list for us men. But this is the role that God has given to us. 2, that was 10 points under number 1. All right. 2, leadership is a gift, and like all gifts, can be cultivated. I think one of the greatest misconceptions about leadership is this thinking, you know what, I'm just not gifted at leadership, so I just have to accept that. I'm not a good leader, therefore I never will be. Yes, leadership is a gift. We saw that in Romans 12:8. But gifts are not binary. You either have them or you don't. Gifts are linear. You can grow in them. There are many, many ways to grow in just about any gift. Pray, asking God to grow us in leadership. If you feel like you're not a good leader, pray, asking God to cultivate leadership in you. Seek counsel on how to become a better leader. I bet you know somebody who is gifted in leadership, and seek counsel from them. Read books on leadership. There are tons of books. Julia was mentioning that in a marriage group the other day about how she was saying that there's not many books about how to be a submissive wife because it's so much the heart, but there's countless books about how to be a good leader. So go to them, read books on leadership. Be humble and teachable. That's probably the best thing I could tell you to do. If you want to know how do you become a better leader, be teachable. Be teachable. Teachability is one of the hardest things because we have to humble ourselves to say, I don't know this. I don't know how to do this. Be teachable and receive feedback and instructions for how to become a better leader. 3, dads, set high standards for yourself. I know that we live in a society where we don't like high standards, right? You might walk away from this sermon being like, man, no thank you, Matt. I had somebody tell me that one time. They actually left our church. They said, Matt, you hold too high of a standard and I can't meet that standard. And I was like, it's not my standard. It's the Bible. I don't even meet that standard. Dads, set high standards for yourself. We live in a society where we don't like high standards. And I know for many fathers, we work at jobs that have very high standards for us. And so when we come home, the last thing we want is more high standards. We want to just veg and play video games or watch TV or just coast. But this is what it means to be a good manager at home. Paul says that overseers are to manage, and not only to manage, but to manage well. Now, how you do that is up to you. Every family is going to divvy up responsibilities differently. I don't do a lick of cooking. Lauren does 101% of the cooking in our house. But I probably clean more than most men. And that's okay. And it's okay how you divvy up those responsibilities. All of that is fine. It's not a matter of how you divvy up responsibilities. It's the fact that you, in fact, do divvy them up. That you take up responsibility, men, and a large part of it. I think if someone were to ask me, define manhood in one word, what's the one word you would use to define manhood? I would say responsibility. Responsibility. Be responsible. That's what it means to be a man. 4, fatherhood is more than discipline, but it's certainly not less. As I mentioned earlier, how does a father keep his children submissive? Through love and discipline and loving discipline. Our children, whether biological or spiritual, need to see that we love them. There should be no question in their mind that their father, whether biological or spiritual, loves them. Fatherhood is more than discipline, but it's certainly not less. Fathers or future fathers, it is your job to discipline your children. It's not that a mother can't do it or a mother shouldn't do it. She should do it. Just don't abdicate your responsibility to discipline your children to the mother and the mother alone. Don't abdicate, dads, your responsibility to discipline your children. Dads and spiritual dads, love your children enough to discipline them and discipline them in a way that they know that you love them and that God loves them. So that's manage your household well. You got it? Got it all down, Pat? Next qualification, exegesis of not a recent convert. Now that word there, recent convert, is literally new plant. All right, it means newly planted in the Christian community, newly converted. This is the only use of this word in the New Testament. Now it's interesting that Paul doesn't specify the time frame of new, right? 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years. He doesn't say. I'm going to assume that it's more on the 6-year side than the 6-day side, but he doesn't say. Now what's the reason why an overseer should not be a newbie? Because if a recent convert is an overseer, Paul writes that he may become puffed up with conceit. That word puffed up with conceit, it's one word in the Greek. It literally just means puffed up or conceited. It can also take the nuance, though, of to be blinded or foolish or mentally ill. It's used 3 times in the New Testament. Here, also in 1 Timothy 6, where he says, if anyone teaches a different doctrine, he is puffed up with conceit and understands nothing. 2 Timothy 3, in the last days, people will be swollen with conceit. Paul writes that this conceit might be so large that the overseer will fall into the condemnation or the judgment of the devil. Well, what is that? What is Paul referring to there? It's difficult to know exactly, because we have to decide whether this is a subjective genitive or an objective genitive. Now, I'm not trying to get all technical here and give you a bunch of... I have to explain this because there's no other way to explain this without explaining this, okay? If it is a subjective genitive, all right, what Paul is saying is that this is condemnation or judgment actively given by the devil. So what Paul is saying is that if the person becomes conceited, God will hand them over to Satan to be judged or condemned by Satan. If it is an objective genitive, he's saying this is condemnation or judgment given to the devil. All right? Meaning that just as the devil was condemned for being conceited and puffed up, so this person will have the same fate as the devil. The problem is either are possible. There's no good way linguistically to determine which one Paul is referring to here. But the point remains the same. An overseer is not to be a recent convert, because if they are, there's a high chance that they will become conceited and puffed up. And this conceit, this puffed upness, will cause them to be condemned or judged either by the devil or just like the devil. Either one. All right? What's the application, though, of this? This, again, is one of the 14 qualifications that doesn't apply to everybody. Certainly, we would never say you can't be a recent convert. That makes no sense. Everybody's a recent convert at one point or another. All right? This qualification is only given specifically to overseers. But the reason behind this qualification, I think, does apply to everybody. Because here's the question. Why would being a recent convert potentially, or maybe even probably, lead to conceit or puffed upness? That's the question, right? Why would that happen? And I think the root behind this is what we call spiritual pride. Now, there's a catch-22 here when we come to spiritual pride. And I'm going to give it to you as your application. Here's the problem. We have to have humility to be a mature Christian. But we have to have maturity to be a humble Christian. So it's just a catch-22 going on, right? Here's the principle of application. The mature Christian is the humble Christian, and the humble Christian is the mature Christian. But we all wrestle with spiritual pride. Every last Christian on the planet wrestles with spiritual pride. Whether it's how much we know, how much we do what we're supposed to do, how much we don't do what we're not supposed to do, how much we serve, how little we sin, how long we've been saved, how many titles we have, how well we respect or affirm us, how talented we are, how many spiritual gifts we are. Even in my own self right now, and thinking, I would listen to a sermon if I was in the congregation. That was a joke. We all wrestle with spiritual pride. All of us. Jonathan Edwards said, spiritual pride takes many forms and shapes, one under another, and encompasses the hearts like the layers of the onion. When you pull one off, there's another one underneath. You never escape pride. Every time you pull it off, there's another one. Even if you are humble, you run the risk of boasting in your humility. So how do we escape this? The best verse that I can think of when it comes to spiritual pride, it may not be the best for you, is 1 Corinthians 4:7. What do you have that you did not receive? And if then you received it, why do you boast as though you didn't receive it? Let me give an illustration of this. Imagine if there was a billionaire who had a son. And this son was due to inherit the estate one day, all $1 billion of it. But the son never did a thing. He just hung around the pool all day long, working on his tan, drinking margaritas, playing Candy Crush or whatever it is people play today. No idea. And then one day his father dies and he inherits the estate. And after he inherits the estate, he starts giving TED Talks about how to grow a company and become successful and rich. He writes books about how to be successful. He posts pictures of his mansion on Instagram. We would look at this man and think, how can he boast? Everything he has and everything he is because of his dad. His dad worked for all of this. He didn't do anything except hang out at the pool and work on his tan. Everything he is because of his father. He didn't earn this. He didn't work for this. Everything he has is a gift to him. Brothers and sisters, the same is true for you and me. The same is true for you and me. What do we have that we did not receive? Nothing. And if we received it, why do we boast as though we did not receive it? Everything good in our life is a gift from God. Everything. I can't even take the next breath apart from the divine grace of God. More than read my Bible or serve or not sin or do something righteous or even be humble. I can't even be humble apart from the grace of God. I remember after I got discipled years ago, and I got this knowledge, I thought I knew something. So I enrolled in seminary because I was like, I have something to offer the kingdom. And then after I went through seminary, I really thought I knew something. And I showed up at this little church and was like, let me tell you about how to walk with God. And it took a few years of shepherding to realize that I know nothing, and I am nothing, and I have earned nothing apart from Jesus Christ. The moment that I find myself getting puffed up with conceit or spiritual pride, I remind myself everything good in my life is a gift from God, given to us by a loving Father. The last qualification, exegesis of well thought of by outsiders. Now, this is certainly the most confusing of the qualifications. I've already had many of you ask me about this qualification, so let's break it down a little. Well thought of is two words in the Greek. It's literally good testimony or good witness. Some of the translations will say well thought of. Others will say good reputation. Some will say good testimony. Some will say speak well of. The word there for outsiders is literally just outside. It literally just means the outside of a cup or anything. It's referring to anybody who's not part of the church body. The question is, why? Why do we need to have a good testimony with outsiders? Why does Paul say that? Paul writes so that we may not fall, or overseers may not fall into the disgrace. That word for disgrace, it means act of disparagement that results in disgrace, reproach, reviling, disgrace, or insult. This word is used 5 times in the New Testament. The other 4 are translated as reproach in the ESV. I think it's interesting that Paul's concern here is that the overseer not fall into reproach. This is basically the same qualification as the first one, to be above reproach. We have 2 nice bookends here of to be above reproach. And Paul says that this falling into reproach is essentially a snare of the devil. It's literally a trap. A snare is a trap set by the devil. Paul talks about these traps. He says in 1 Timothy 6:9, those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare. So riches are a trap for people who desire to be rich. 2 Timothy 2:26, that they may come to their senses and escape from what? The snare of the devil after being captured by him to do his will. And so Paul is saying essentially here that overseers must be above reproach. Why? Because if they're not, they will most likely fall into a trap of the devil. Well, what's the application of that? Well thought of by outsiders. Here's the application. Here it is. Christians are called to live in such a way that the lost world has nothing bad to say about us. Now, I'll explain what I mean by that, because I have to give a lot of clarifications on that. I have people say bad things about me all the time. I think the difficulty we have with this qualification is how do we reconcile it with Jesus' words? Jesus said, you will be hated by all, and you will be hated by all nations. Blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you and revile you and spurn your name as evil. Therefore the world hates you. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them. So how do we reconcile the fact that Jesus told us over and over and over again that the world would hate us, and yet Paul says the world must think well of you? How does that puzzle put together? I think it's important that when we read those passages about Jesus saying the world hate us, that we not miss the direction of that hate. Let me read that. They'll be on the screen for you again. And you will be hated by all. Why? For my name's sake. And you will be hated by all nations. Why? For my name's sake. Blessed are you when people hate you and exclude you and revile you and spurn your name as evil. Why? on account of the Son of Man. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, I chose you out of the world. Therefore, the world hates you. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because, why? They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Christians are called to live in such a way that the lost world has nothing bad to say about us. But they're going to say bad things about Jesus. They're going to say bad things about the commands of Jesus and the standards of God. And they will insult us, and they will abuse us and heap insults upon us. And that is good and glorious, provided the direction of that reproach is rooted in Jesus and not our sin. So let me give 5 short principles to take away from this qualification, all right? The way that I make sense of this, the way I put this puzzle together. 5 short principles. Here they are. Number 1, Christians are not called to necessarily live in such a way that people like us. In fact, Jesus promises the exact opposite. He promises that the world will hate us. If we make it our goal for everybody to like us, one of 2 things will happen. We will either A, work tirelessly and still fail, or B, we will compromise somewhere in the Christian faith. One of those 2 things will happen if you make it your goal for everybody to like you. 2, Christians are not called to give the world an unnecessary reason for people to hate us. Meaning, if I am a jerk, but I profess to know Christ, and the world hates me because I'm a jerk, I can't say, well, Jesus said the world would hate me. No, Jesus said the world will hate you because of Christ-likeness, not because of jerk-likeness. The principle of those hate passages is not go out of your way to make people hate you. You don't have to go out of your way for people to hate you. You don't have to seek out for people to hate you. That's exactly what Paul is speaking against. Paul says develop a good testimony, a good witness with the lost world. 3, the world is to think well of our character, not necessarily our content. When Paul says that overseers are to have a good testimony with outsiders, he's referring to the overseer's character. But the world is not going to necessarily think well of the content. Meaning, if I go up and tell a homosexual that homosexuality is wrong and a sin, I imagine they won't like me very much. If I tell a man or a woman who is having an affair that adultery is sin, I imagine they won't like me very much. If I tell a lost person that God will punish the unrighteous because he is just, but he is also love and has made a way for them to be saved if they trust in him, they may not like me very much. But what they really don't like and what they really don't think well of is not me, but the content. And the content is not really mine, but God's. Now, I can certainly deliver that content in a way that is not Christ-like. But the qualification given by Paul is referring to the character of the overseer, how they live. 4, nothing will kill an overseer's, a church's, or a Christian's witness faster than hypocrisy. Nothing. I can't tell you how many times I'll be out in public and I'll be getting into an argument with my wife. And after the argument, I'll realize I had CSBC on my shirt and Jesus on the back. And I was like, oh gosh, did they see that? Or I'm playing in a basketball league and I'm getting super competitive to the point of sin. And afterwards, the guy comes up to me and says, hey, what do you do for a living? Oh, I work in social work. Or I call up a customer service representative and get really angry with them and in a way that doesn't reflect Christ. And then they're like, well, can you email us? And then I email them and I forget that my digital signature is at the bottom of the email. That says pastor. Being above reproach means living in such a way that we look more like Jesus than not. Nothing will kill an overseer's, a church's, or a Christian's witness faster than hypocrisy. Yeah, we're going to make mistakes, guys. But hopefully if our lost neighbor or our lost coworker or lost classmate or family member were asked about us, they would have positive things to say about us, about our character. And 5, last point, Satan has set up and will continue to set up many snares to bring reproach on the name of Christ. Satan is looking for every opportunity to get us to fall, to bring reproach on the name of Christ. And he has an unlimited arsenal to choose from. That's the problem. Money, sex, power, greed, idolatry. The world may look at us and hate us because we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to many. But may we never be that stumbling block because of our sin. Because we've fallen into one of Satan's traps. It's okay if Jesus is the stumbling block. It's not okay if we are the stumbling block. Christian, I want to encourage you. Your holiness is bigger than you. And my holiness is bigger than me. As we close, I hope and pray that if the lost world were to put our life under a microscope, they might say, we don't agree with their position on homosexuality or abortion. We don't agree with their views of heaven and hell. We don't agree with their exclusivity or their high standards of holiness. But they've been faithful to their spouses. They've been responsible and dedicated workers at their jobs. They've been good parents and good citizens, not given to addictions. They've been respectable and honorable in their interactions. They've been kind and hospitable in the use of their home. They've been a peacemaker and listened to my concerns and my cares and my questions. They've shown love and care and concern for me and many others. They have shown integrity and generosity in their finances. And apart from their beliefs based on the Bible, which we do not agree with, nor will we submit to, we really have nothing bad to say about them. Brothers and sisters, being above reproach is a high calling, but we bear a high name. Let's bear it well.